My name, as Mary said, is Annette Akinson. I'm a holistic cannabis herbalist. I've taken quite a few classes and studies, including graduating from the Holistic Cannabis Academy. I love this plant. I love all parts of this plant, and it certainly changed my life. So before I go any further, I do have a few disclaimers, not the least of which is I am not tech savvy, so I hope this works. I'm going to do my best. I've worked on the sound in the presentation, and I hope it comes off okay. We do have to get some legal stuff out of the way quickly. All content in this presentation, including text, images, audio, or other formats, were created for informational purposes only. The content's not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard or seen here. Also, the FDA has not provided any evaluation for the products I talk about. The products discussed in the presentation are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Also, I do have financial interests in this space. I am the owner of Highway 420 Bremerton and Highway 420 Silverdale. These are cannabis stores in Kitsap County that have medical endorsements. More recently, as I said, there we go. More recently, I opened a CBD only store in the Kitsap Mall. Unfortunately, that was right before the pandemic, and we did close that store. We have reopened up on Clear Creek next to Highway 420 Silverdale. After being in the cannabis space for about 6 years, what I realized is there's a significant number of people that may have some apprehension of coming into a cannabis store, and I wanted to create a space where they might feel more comfortable just broaching the subject of what cannabis and CBD in particular can do for a person. It certainly changed my life. So let's get to why you guys are all here. What is CBD? Or more specifically, its official name is cannabidiol. Before we can talk about really what CBD is, we have to go back and define a few terms. I know there's quite a bit going on in this slide, but I'll try and break it down pretty quickly. Down in the far corner, you can see CBD out here. CBD is nothing more than a type of compound, which is that line of compounds is called cannabinoids. THC is also a cannabinoid, a compound that comes from the cannabis plant. THC is the cannabinoid that we think most of, giving us that psychoactive high. Those type of compounds that come from the cannabis plant, hemp and marijuana are exactly the same plant. They are both the cannabis plant. The government, though, has given us fairly arbitrary definition, but it is the legal definition that separates these two identical plants, and that is the amount of THC that's in that plant. So if the plant contains 0.3% or more of that cannabinoid, that psychoactive cannabinoid, then it's considered marijuana. If it has 0.3% or less of that psychoactive cannabinoid, the government has called it hemp. That is the legal definition, but in the field, and I think a much better definition is we would just consider hemp versus marijuana based on the reason that the plant is grown. So if the cannabis plant is being grown for its stalks to create fibers or paper, we would consider it hemp. Oops, what happened? This is that technical difficulty thing that I said I have. Uh-oh, how do I go forward? Oh, there we go. So again, if the plant cannabis is being grown for its fibers, we would call the plant hemp. Focusing on the stalks of the plant creates amazing fibers. It's been part of our history for a long time. the U.S. Navy has always had in the past their sails and their riggings and ropes created from hemp fiber. Over 55 tons it took just to rig up the USS Constitution when she fought in the War of Independence. Also, hemp fiber is what our original draft of the Declaration of Independence was created on. So why the plant is grown, why that cannabis plant is grown, if it's grown for stalks, we would usually call it hemp. If it's grown for its seeds, we would also consider it hemp. Hemp seeds are extremely nutritional, great source of fiber and other vitamins. I often put it in my smoothie in the morning. So cannabis plant grown for stalks or seeds is considered hemp. When that plant of cannabis is grown for its flower, this beautiful picture here, we also consider that a bud. We would usually call that marijuana. And that plant is used and those compounds are extracted from it for religious purposes, certainly for medical purposes, and also recreational. This picture here on the right-hand side is a gentleman named Larry. He suffers from Parkinson's, and you can actually watch a video online where he gives himself a dose of cannabis and goes from that left-hand picture where he's extremely rigid, uncomfortable, and suffering from some spasticity to the second picture. It's heart-wrenching to watch, but also amazing. Nowadays, though, because hemp enjoys a better legal status than marijuana, we are growing the hemp plant for its flowers, and we are extracting those compounds, specifically the CBD compound. So back to this chart, we start at the top. We've talked about the cannabis plant, that marijuana and hemp are both that same plant. From that plant, we can extract compounds, one type of compound being those cannabinoids, where we actually get our CBD. And before we get into that, I do want to talk about one other type of compound that comes out of the plant, and that's a terpene. Terpenes are also highly medicinal in their value. They're in all our plants and flowers in existence. If you go into the center of this, linalool is a terpene that is most prominently found in lavender. Limonene, the one to the left, found in citrus fruits. These are also part of the cannabis plant that create the medicine that we're talking about today. So to the cannabinoids, getting dialed into the CBD that we're here to discuss. Cannabinoids, of which CBD is one, are nothing more than a group of atoms, 21 atoms of carbon, 30 atoms of hydrogen, 2 atoms of oxygen. All cannabinoids have that same makeup, but they're put together in different chains, different molecular structures, giving them various effects on our body. But all cannabinoids are, including CBD and THC, is a group of atoms. Lastly, down here at the bottom, it's the way that, the way that we extract, and these terms that you'll find when you go into either a cannabis store or a CBD store. On the products you're purchasing, you will find full spectrum CBD or broad spectrum CBD or CBD isolate. All this means in full spectrum is that they took the cannabis plant and they keep all of the pieces of it, all of the different cannabinoids, all of the terpenes, all of the flavonoids, and the product contains some of all of those. But remember, if it is coming from a hemp plant, which is what you're buying in a CBD store, even though it contains that THC, it's going to be such a minuscule amount, that under 0.3%, that it is not going to have a psychoactive high. The broad spectrum CBD products are that plant, but they throw out the THC and keep everything else. Isolate is they take the plant, they throw out everything except the CBD and keep that in its purest isolated form. People ask which one of these is best, and that depends on what you're treating. It is important to note, though, that unfortunately THC is what is used for drug testing. So even that minuscule amount in a full spectrum CBD product might possibly cause a drug test to come up positive. So if that's part of your life, you probably want to stay away from those full spectrum products. One last term that's kind of a buzzword in the cannabis field is the entourage effect. And that's just talking about that full spectrum that a lot of us believe is the best way to use products. The term is used to describe the synergy we get from everything in the plant being used together, creating a higher efficacy than if we separate the components. There's continued debate on that. There's certainly reasons to use full spectrum and broad spectrum and even isolate. In the cannabis field, and I think in all of the medical field, we're hearing a lot more about personalized medicine, where we might be isolating these individual compounds and bringing them back together in specific ways that work best for us. All right, I know this is another slide with a lot going on, but it's super important to realize that we've discovered what cannabinoids are, phytocannabinoids coming from the plant, but why do those work in our bodies? What is the thing that makes cannabinoids from the plant work? Well, if you look down at the bottom, it's because we have a system called the endocannabinoid system, or ECS for short. It was discovered, I believe, in the late 80s. And it's a system like we have a digestive system, we have an immune system, we have a neurological system. We also have an endocannabinoid system. And if we have that system in our bodies, we must have something that's reacting on that system. And that's what we call endocannabinoids. Cannabinoids that are made inside of our bodies that react on that system, that endocannabinoid system. One of them is called anandamide. There's several others that have been discovered in recent years. But they're the same as the phytocannabinoids. What we've learned are THC, CBD, CBN, and now there's also synthetic cannabinoids made in a lab. One of those listed here is Marinol. That's a synthetic THC, but there are several, I think, synthetic THCs and certainly some synthetic CBDs being created in the lab. No matter whether they come from our bodies, from the plant, or the lab, they're all going to react on those receptors and affect that ECS system. What the ECS system, yeah.
I just wanted to say, folks, as Annette's speaking, if you have questions, please unmute yourself and ask questions. They're encouraged. She's here to educate us all. Thank you.
And hopefully we'll have time at the end for questions too, because usually questions are created more as I go along. But yeah, questions are important. I'm gonna play a short video. It's about 1.5 minutes, and hopefully this will work, that kind of describes what the ECS does inside of our bodies. So let's hope, because it's pretty spectacular. Come on, link up, maybe, oh.
What is the endocannabinoid system and how does it work? The endocannabinoid system, or ECS, is a body-wide signaling network that promotes homeostasis. In other words, as your external environment changes, the ECS keeps your body's internal processes stable. When life stressors increase, for example, the ECS helps maintain neuroplasticity to reduce the risk of depression and anxiety. In a similar way, the ECS helps balance processes that resolve inflammation and regulate immune response. So, how does it work? The ECS is a network of receptors and signaling molecules. The two types of receptors are called CB1 and CB2. As threats to your biological balance arise, signaling molecules called endocannabinoids, or ECBs, bind to CB1 and CB2 receptors, triggering cascades of signals that help maintain homeostasis. Our bodies naturally produce ECBs, but poor diet, Lack of exercise and other factors can disrupt ECB production, contributing to biological imbalance and conditions such as chronic inflammation, poor immune response, depression, and anxiety. Be sure to watch part 2 to learn how to use omega-3s to help resolve chronic inflammation.
All right. I'm sorry, I think that was a little scratchy, but hopefully you got the main point that I think is important in that video, and that's that the ECS, or that endocannabinoid system, is thought to work in some ways as a homeostasis or a balancing system within our bodies, and that would be the reason that we hear people talk about cannabis, CBD, THC having such great effect on so many areas within our bodies. This is one of my favorite slides. If you go into the center here, it's showing different systems within our bodies that, yes? Oh, I'm going to keep going. Different systems within our bodies that are affected by different cannabinoids from the cannabis or the hemp plant. Personally, I use cannabis, different cannabinoids, because I suffer from arthritis and inflammation. You see that on the outer circle, which is the individual conditions or ailments that we may be trying to treat with the plant and parts of the plant. I take CBD every day in the form of a capsule, just like a vitamin. And I've been able to reduce intake of ibuprofen from doing that. I used to think that it was kind of a snake oil salesman selling me cannabis before I got in the business, because you heard everyone talking about how it affected all of these areas in this outer circle. And I thought, how can one plant have an effect on all of these different conditions? Well, after watching that video and learning about the endocannabinoid system, if it truly does act to provide homeostasis, then we can start to understand how it would have effects in all of these areas. Some of the greatest studies, can I go back? Yeah, some of the greatest studies going on right now in this field are in this neurological area. The government has given the first ever FDA-approved drug status to CBD from the plant to treat certain forms of childhood epilepsy. You can Google this and see amazing videos that are both heart-wrenching and heartwarming at the same time, of parents administering some form of cannabis treatment to children while they're in the throes of a grand mal seizure, and watch them just calm down and stop seizing. It's unbelievable. Same with the gentleman, Larry, that we talked about earlier with his Parkinson's. It's just, I don't know. I love this plant, and that's one of the reasons why. There's also some really big studies going on right now about Alzheimer's and dementia. Is the Israeli university that actually has been the forefront of studying the plant, has done quite a few studies showing that parts of the cannabis plant can remove the plaque in our brains that is on the forefront of causing the Alzheimer's and dementia. And they have some pretty good studies available right now that you can look at. I love this site. Hopefully we can go here as well. It's pubmed.com. The National Library of Medicine. When anyone tells me that there's no studies and there's no proof other than anecdotal that the cannabis plant has positive effects on our body, this is where I send them. You can see here when I typed in the word CBD, there came up with over 8,000 results. That's 8,000 some form of study. And this isn't Wikipedia where just anyone can add to the content. These are vetted journal entries and that kind of thing. And even if I add in clinical trials, which is what the scientific and medical field is asking us for in order to prove that these products and compounds in the cannabis plant work, I also say hogwash. There's over 474 just with CBD. And if we look at this first one, oral medicinal cannabinoids to relieve symptom burden in the palliative care of patients with advanced cancer, this is a double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized clinical trial. That's, from what I understand, the gold standard for clinical trials. So there are studies. Do we need more studies? Absolutely. But there are studies. It's not just anecdotal information. All right. So once you've done some research and you think maybe CBD products might work for you or for someone you know, finding the right product that's going to work in your body is something that takes some trial and error. You've got to spend some time working on finding the right product. There are some important things to consider, and in the field that we look at, the first one being the ratio of cannabinoids. Remember, we looked at cannabinoids. They're just one type of compound in the plant. Two of the most studied cannabinoids are CBD and THC. So often that is what we're looking at when we're looking at ratios within a product that you could purchase in a store. Now, all of the ones listed here would have to be bought in a cannabis store because they have an amount of THC above that 0.3%. The bottom one, you can see we now have started to look at secondary cannabinoids, the CBN, there's CBG, CBV, there's 100 plus cannabinoids within that compound type. As you add in THC, if you're looking at that within your ratio, you certainly do have to think about the possibility of increased psychoactivity. But in this 18:1, which you could purchase in a cannabis store, you're not going to have enough THC to create that psychoactivity, but it would be closer to that entourage effect that we spoke about, which is this synergistic way the plant works together. Another thing that's important to look at is the method of administration. What way are you going to take the active ingredient of CBD into your body, and how much bioavailability is there going to be from that specific product you're taking in? And bioavailability is, in simple forms, just how much of the product is going to be left for distribution to where you need it after some absorption, metabolism, and excretion. And every product is going to have a different amount of bioavailability. This is a good starting chart to look at some of the different products that are available and different methods of administration for us. When you look at the first one, that lotion topical, there's 0% bioavailability. However, we are putting that topical on our skin where we have cannabinoid receptors. Those receptors are sensitive to the topical, and we do get a great effect in reducing pain, even if it's not going in and making a systematic change. I used to use quite a bit of topical prior to starting to take the CBD capsules because I had a lot more pain every day than I have now. By taking it and ingesting it, I believe that I've changed my internal system. I have less inflammation, therefore I use less topical. When we look at the capsules here, the bioavailability for this chart suggests that upwards of only 19%. What that truly means is if I take a 100 milligram capsule, I'm only really going to keep about 20 milligrams of active ingredient to use in my body. We lose a lot through our digestive system. There is some work being done currently on nanomemulsification, or making the capsule water soluble. And the idea is that by making the molecule of CBD smaller, nano sizing it, you might say, it's more easily taken into the bloodstream, and you may have more bioavailability. So when you're looking at a product, not only are you looking whether it's a capsule or not, whether it's full spectrum, broad spectrum, or isolate, you're also looking at how much bioavailability there may be, and that may change even in the capsule if the capsule is nanomulsified. Those are words you'll find on the product packaging. Sublinguals, under your tongue, you're holding it for a few seconds. Some of it's going directly into the bloodstream, so you have greater bioavailability than something that goes all through the digestive system. There's also nanomulsified sublingual oils, bumping that bioavailability up again a little more. And then flower inhalation, that's smoking, vaporizing. There's a lot of reasons people don't want to do that, not the least of which is that smoking plant matter has carcinogens, and that's not necessarily good for our lungs. But it has some of the highest bioavailability, and it also has what we call quick onset. So if you're in the middle of something that you need to treat right away, then inhalation might work well for you. There's a couple other types of administration that aren't on here. One of those being fully transdermal topicals, different than the topical listed here, where those fully transdermal topicals are meant to get through and have a carrying agent that make it available, and it can get through the dermis of the skin. And it, as one of the greatest bioavailabilities, they're suggesting upward of 90% gets into the bloodstream and is available for whatever you're trying to cure. There are also now suppositories, there's nasal sprays, there's inhalers, there's a multitude of methods of administration. And whoever your expert is that you're working with, these are different things to talk about in finding the right product for you or for a client. One of the last things is, how much do you take? How often do you take it? This is one suggestion of a dosing guide, but you can see that first sentence there. Finding out what dosage of CBD is right for you can be tricky. It's not a one size fits all. There's so many questions and variables to answer, but there is a standard method of what we call upward titration. This dosing guide here is only one example, but when you look at it, they suggest that you try one dose and you continue that dose for an entire week. Whatever that dose is, you keep it the same. See how it affects the condition that you're trying to change. If you don't find significant improvement, the next week you can double that dose, and so on and so on. The one great thing about the compounds in the cannabis plant, and for sure CBD, is that the safety risks are so small. This plant, no compound in the cannabis plant, reacts to our body and shuts down our internal systems. It doesn't stop us from breathing. It doesn't stop our heart from beating. Unlike, say, an opiate, where you can have an opiate overdose that kills you, it would be very hard to die from an overdose with cannabis. But it is fairly expensive, and it's not paid for by our insurance. So we do want to find the smallest dose that will actively, optimally treat whatever you're working on. A couple more things to point out on this guide. In the bottom corner, they talk about drops: 1 drop, 2 drops, 3 drops. It's important that it's not the amount of liquid. I don't like that it says drop, because 1 drop could have 50 milligrams of active ingredient, and another 1 drop could only have 5 milligrams of active ingredient. So it's better to look at dosing guides by the milligrams of CBD in the drop, rather than just looking at the size of the drops. This chart also suggests on taking it 3 times a day, and that's very beneficial for a lot of people, keeping the active ingredient the same throughout your body all the time. But you have to be realistic. Will you take it 3 times a day? That's like any medicine or vitamin. We have to find what works for us personally. I won't remember to take things once a day most of the time, let alone 3 times a day. So I work through this chart through titration with myself. I take my capsule, my 25 milligrams of nanomulsified CBD every day, once a day. There are times if I'm working in the yard or I've exerted myself, I might increase that amount that I take. So this is a starting place. Again, you do want to talk with an expert about what products and how much you're going to take yourself. Hopefully we're going to go. This is another site. You need to remember that all the compounds in the plant, CBD, the THC, it's a powerful plant. So as we grow older, we certainly have, whoops, we have to put in the full name. We're taking other medications, and you want to see if there's drug interactions. And this site is a really good place to start. At least you can put in that cannabidiol, remember, and that's the official name for CBD, and it comes up with over 500 drug interactions. One thing that we can learn if you go through and look at all of this is a lot of those drug interactions are synergistically positive, meaning if you introduce CBD with what the other medication is, it may give the other medication more efficacy, bump it up. The synergistic effect of taking the two together is more positive. But again, I'm not a doctor, but I do look at this site. You can actually put in all of the specific medications that you're taking and look and see what interactions, and then you can take that with you when you go see your doctors. Certainly, like I said, as a starting point of looking at those possibilities of interaction. All right. So then after you've gone through all that, you decided that CBD or some other part of the cannabis plant is something you're interested in. You want to try it. Where do you go to get it? What's it like to walk into one of these stores? Well, asking the question of what it's like to walk into a cannabis store is kind of like asking what's it like to walk into a clothing store. That's going to be a very different experience if I go into a clothing store on Rodeo Drive versus going into a clothing store in Kitsap County. And the same with a CBD store. That's just a more narrowly focused store, like walking into a shoe store. It's going to be a different experience walking into Jimmy Choo versus walking into a Payless shoe store. And nowadays, you can find CBD pretty much anywhere. It's at convenience gas stations. It's at Safeway. The other day, I saw CBD products in Hallmark and Barnes and Noble. The difference with those, was there a question, or I'm getting a lot of feedback?
So now I had to move on to access.
Hello?
I think it's because not everybody's muted.
Somebody in the presentation is talking and we're hearing a lot of your background. Could they mute? Hello?
I fixed it.
Okay.
There were two people that weren't muted.
All right. Sorry about that. Back to that retail store. The big difference in going into one of those stores is you really need to have all the information yourself. There's not going to be an expert or someone that really knows anything about CBD when you walk into Barnes and Noble, but it's on the shelf and it may be the product you need or want, but you will have had to do your own research. Finding the right cannabis store or the right CBD store, what I tell people is use the internet. There's probably 20 plus cannabis stores in Kitsap County. They all have websites. Find the one that appeals to you. They're going to have a different feel. They're going to have a different group of people that work there. Look and see what their store looks like. What do the people that work there look like? Do they have a medical focus? Do they have a medical endorsement? Same with the CBD stores. I think there's 2 or 3 of them in Kitsap County now. All have websites, as do all brands of CBD. Go ahead and Google, pure CBD oil, if that's one you've heard of or your friend uses. Find out what that brand's about. I certainly invite you to come to my cannabis store or my CBD store. I do pride myself and believe that my staff are some of the most educated around. I pay for education. I encourage them to become educated, certainly in the medical field. We have a lot of CBD products in the cannabis store, and then, of course, the CBD store as well. The last thing I want to leave you with is this word: testing, testing, testing. Unfortunately, because CBD currently is not a very regulated market, there's no rules and regulations of how it's grown and how the products are made. You want to be very careful when purchasing your CBD. You want to ask for the testing results. Has the product been tested? Not only has it been tested to make sure that it has the ingredients that the bottle says it has, but also to make sure that it doesn't have something in it that can be harmful for you. We don't want pesticides, mold, heavy metal in the medicine that you're trying to take. So any brand, any store that's worth going into will be very upfront with testing results. All of the CBD brands that you should look at to purchase, right on the front page should have something that says testing or lab results or quality assurances, where you can actually go and see the lab results that show that it has the CBD in it, it says, and that it doesn't have pesticides, molds, and those kind of things. That's all I have. Thank you for listening. I hope I answered some questions and didn't just totally confuse you. I welcome emails, phones, texts, all of that. Anytime, like I said, I love this plant. I love everything about it. So
I'm going to ask you a question, and maybe some other folks might be having the
I'm
same
going to try and
question.
stop sharing. Yeah, there we go.
So I was talking to my best friend the other day, and she has some trouble sleeping. And I said, oh, I'm going to be on a CBD presentation on Tuesday. I'm going to ask about CBD with sleeping because I know it can help. So if someone were to come into your store and ask about a CBD product for sleeping, what would you ask them? How would the conversation go?
For some people, CBD alone will affect a relaxation, and that will enhance sleep. I usually say CBD alone is not the greatest answer to a sleep issue, but that synergistic properties of putting it together with other terpenes and other cannabinoids, it can be a sleep aid. So secondary cannabinoids, CBN, has some studies that are showing much greater efficacy towards that deeper sleep. And then also you'll find CBD put together with myrcene, which is a terpene that certainly does lend to sleep. So I would look at it with a few more properties and compounds together, not usually just CBD alone for sleep. But relaxing, the relaxing part, if that's the reason you're not sleeping, is you just can't let your body go, then it can certainly help.
Thank you. Does anybody else have questions? That was a lot of information. You broke it down so well. Questions? Unmute, ask a question.
Annette, this is Carlin from Visiting Angels. Do you
Carlin?
have any, good morning, do you have any marketing collateral or any information? The case managers typically keep info on them when they're in the home meeting with families. And if the conversation comes up and there's interest, do you have anything that is just an educational form that we could leave with them?
So I don't have a small broken down. There's a lot of information. I'm working on a CBD 101. There, I will get some of that within the next month. How's that?
That sounds great.
Yes. Writing it down that I've promised. Anything else?
You talked about that, the apprehension that folks have walking into a cannabis store or a CBD store. So I guess you were saying maybe you should do your research online first, because you can't just walk into any cannabis store and assume that they have CBD products if that's what you're looking for.
Well, I would say 97% of cannabis stores are going to have some CBD products. Certainly some of those ratio products they will have. The more medically focused a cannabis store, the more they'll have of that type of product. What I was saying is that the internet's your friend, and, pull up Highway 420, look and see if that's someplace you'd feel comfortable. Also, most of the stores will have menus online where you can look and see all of the CBD products that they have. And there's a myriad of them for sure.
I have a question.
Yeah.
One of the issues with prescribing the medication, CBD or Marinol, is the rather strict regulation for facilities that are receiving federal funds. So, for instance, I'll take Martha and Mary. I have to follow those guidelines because we're involved with the feds. And so I can write for Marinol, which I do. But I feel limited because I would like to find out more about CBD. And so do you have any insight? Do you think that this, there's a hope that this product will be expanded more, deregulated at some point, or not deregulated, but investigated?
Deregulated's the right word. We want descheduled. That's the word we like to throw out there. Descheduled.
Yeah. What's your insight on that?
Absolutely. Like we never know what the heck the political world is going to do. But this ball's rolling, and I don't think there's any way they're going to stop it. I feel very confident that we will get to a place where they deschedule cannabis. The CBD part, the compound taken out, that's changed a lot since Epidiolex has become a thing that you as a doctor can prescribe from the plant for those certain forms of epilepsy. That's kind of put a kink in things in the way that we will legalize CBD to be used as a vitamin or an herbal supplement, or even to add it to food. As far as prescribing, you're right. You can only prescribe the ones that are approved by FDA, the several synthetics and that one compound from the plant, Epidiolex. What we're finding is that more and more, because of your Hippocratic oath, that if the patient is the one bringing the topic to you, that you can discuss it and send them to someone that may be more of an expert about how to use the product. It's a really unfortunate situation, and I don't have a clear answer, but we're not going to be prescribing it, unfortunately, I don't think, in the near future.
Okay, thank you for that. That's unfortunate. When I had a research lab at Stanford, and I was studying people with spastic bladders, I was interested in placing THC essentially in the bladder, and I had the equipment to measure bladder pressures and spasm, but I spent a year trying to get permission from the federal government to conduct the experiment. It was never successful, so I gave it up. So it's a pretty big roadblock.
So that on the research front, there's huge movement. I know this isn't really part of it, but in short, it used to be the only place that you could get the THC or any part of the cannabis plant to do research was Ole Miss. One university had the only approved growing operation, and they were the only ones that had the cannabis. That has changed. They have opened up the ability for research. There are several facilities now that are able to provide the compounds from the cannabis plant for research. So that's happening, and that's huge in the last couple of years. So it would be a lot easier now for you to do that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
Anyone else? It's 9:01. Any more questions? I've recorded this. So for the Kitsap provider members that were unable to attend this morning, we have this wonderful presentation, and you did an amazing job, Annette, educating us this morning. Thank you so much.
And I would love feedback. This is the first time I've given the presentation, and I know that it was a great deal of information. So anybody that has feedback either now or would email me, I'd really appreciate that, is because, like I said, educating people about this plant and the benefits of it is something that's probably going to be part of the rest of my life, because it's amazing. And I've seen amazing results for people.